Hi, in this video I'm going to discuss or explain about sorting algorithms, namely selection sort and merge sort, using a sample code. So now, let's run the code first. After running the code, it will ask us to enter the size of the array. So let's enter 5 for the size of the array. Then it will ask us to enter 5 unsorted elements. So let's enter 5, 3, 4, 1, 2. Then after that, it will output the elements before sorting it. Then it will output the elements after sorting it using selection sort and merge sort. In selection sort, we divide it into two parts. The sorted part in the left and the unsorted part on the right. Then inside the array, inside the program, it has the selection sort method or method selection sort. Then inside this method, it has a for loop or nested for loop. It will be used to iterate the it will be used for iteration. So now the outer for loop initialize I to 0. So I is now 0. Then it will be test if I is less than the length of the array. Then since the length of the array is 5, it will be test if 0 is less than 5, which is true. Then it will proceed to initialize the variable index to the value of I. So now our index is 0. Then it will proceed to the inner for loop. Then the inner for loop initialize j to the value of I added by 1. So our j is now 1 since our I is 0 added by 1. Then it will test if j is less than the length of the array, which is true since our j is 1, then the length of our array is 5. Then it will proceed to test if the element inside the array of j is less than array of index. So since our j is currently 1, it will proceed to get the element inside the index of 1. The element inside the index of 1 is 3. Then the r of index will get the element inside the index 0 since our index is currently 0. Then the 5. Then it will test if 3 is less than 0, which is true. So it will proceed to pass the value of j to variable index. So now our variable index now have a value of 3. I have a value of 1 since then it will increment j by 1. So now our j is 2. Then it will proceed to then test if j is less than the length of the array, which is 2, which is true since 2 is less than 5. Then it proceeds to test if the element inside the array of j is less than the element inside the array of index. The the element inside the array of j, then it will test if the element inside the array of j is less than the array of index. Then our array of j is then it will proceed to test if the element inside the r of j is less than the r of index. Our r of j is 4 since our j is currently 2, so it will proceed to get the index inside. So it will proceed to get the element inside the index 2, which is 4. then it will then in, the r of index is r is then the r of index is 3, since our index is currently equals to 1, then it will proceed to get the element inside the index of 1, since it is which is 3. Then it will test if 4 is less than 3, which is false. If it is false, it will just directly increment j by 1, so 3. Then test if 3 is less than 5, which is true. Then it will proceed to test if the element of r of j is less than r of index. So now our r of j will get the elements inside the index of 3, since our j is 3. So the element inside the r of j the element inside the index 3 is 1. Then the index is still the 3 is still 3, or the r of index is still 3. Then it will be test if 1 is less than 3, which is true. So it will index will be initialized to the index. So index will be initialized to the current value of j. So the current value of j is 3. So now our j is equals 3. Then it will proceed to test, and it will increment j by 1 again. So now our j is equals to 4. Then it will test if 4 is less than 5, which is true. Then it will proceed to test if the element inside the r of j, which is 2, is less than the element inside the r of index, which is 1. Since 2 is not less than 1, it is false. Then it will directly increment j by 1. So now our j is 5. Then it will test if 5 is less than 5, which is false because 5 is equals 5. So this is false. So this is false. Then it will test, and so now it will increment. It will since this is false, it will just directly proceed. So it will stop the iteration. So now since this is false, it will stop the iteration of the inner for loop and it will proceed to this line of code. So this line of code is this line of code. Then this int smaller will, so this the value of r of index will be passed to the smaller number. So the current value of r of index is 1, since our index is 1. Since our index is 3, so it will proceed to get the element inside the index 3, which is 1. Then the value of the r of I will be passed to r of index. So the value of r of I is 5, since I is 0, so it will proceed to get, so it will get the element inside the index 0, which is 5. So now our index have the value of 5. So now our r of index will have a value of 5. Then the variable smaller number will pass its value to r of I, which is r of I. So the value of 1 will be passed to the r of I, or the r of y, I. So now our index 0 will now have a value of 1. Then our then our index of 3 will have a value of 5. So the position of 1 and 5 is swapped. Then we incremented I by 1. So now I is 1, then test, then it will test if 1 is less than 5, which is true. Then it will proceed to test. Then it will initialize index to the value of I, which is 1. Then test if j, then the inner for loop will initialize the value of j to the current value of I added by 1. So now our j is 2. So now we incremented I by 1. So now our I is 1. Then test if 1 is less than 5, which is true. Then it will proceed to initialize the value of index to the value of I, which is 1. Then we execute the inner for loop, which initialize j to the current value of I to added by 1. So now our j is 2, since 1 plus 1 is 2. Then test if 2 is less than 5, which is true. Then we proceed to execute the if statement inside the inner for loop, which tests if the element inside the array R of j, or the element inside the index of 2, since which is 4, since our j is 2. Then test if the element is less than the element inside R of index, or the element inside the index of 1, which is 3. Since 4 is not less than 3, this is false. Then we directly increment the j by 1. So now our j is 3. Then test if 3 is less than 5, which is true. Then it will proceed to if statement. Then test if the element inside the index of 3, since we are in the index of 3, since our j is 3, then the element inside the index, test if the element inside the index of 3 is less than, which I test if the elements inside the index of 3, which is 5, is less than to the current to the element of index 1, which is this 3. This is false. So we just directly incremented j by 1. So now our j is 4. Then test if, then since it is 4 is less than 5, this is true. Test it. Then we test if the element inside the index of 4, which is 2, is less than to 3, which is the current element of index, the current element of the index 1. Since this is true, since this is true, so our index will be initialized to the current value of j, which is 4. So our j is now 4. Then increment j by 1, which is, then now it will become 5. Since 5 is not less than 5, because it is equals, so because less than 5, and since 5 is equals to 5, the iteration for the inner for loop will stop and will proceed in this line of code. Then this line of code will this line of code will pass the value of the R of index, or the current value then this line of code will pass the element inside the R of index, or the R of index, which is 2, since our index is R of index, or the element, and then this line of code will pass the value of the R of index, or the element, the element inside the index of 4, which is 2. Then 2 will be passed to smaller number. So 2 will be passed to the variable smaller number. So now smaller number have value of 2, then pass the current value of the R of index, R of I, or the element inside the index of 1, which is 3, to the value of R of index. So now our index 4 is now 3. Then we pass the value of smaller number to the to the index of 1, since R of I is index 1. So now our index of 1 will have element of 2. Then we increment I by 1. So now our I is 2. Then test if 2 is less than 5, which is true. Then initialize index to 2, since our I is 2. Then we initialize the value of j to the current value of I with added by 1. So now our j is 3. Then it will proceed to test if 3 is less than 5, which is true. Then we proceed to if statement. This will test if index of, this will proceed to test if if the element inside the index of 3, which is 5, is less than to the element of the current element of the index of 2, which is 4. This is false because 5 is not less than 4. Then we just directly increment we just directly increment j to what? We just directly increment j by 1. So now our j is 4. Then test if 4 is less than 5, which is true. Then we will test if the current element inside the index of 4, which is 3, is less than to the current element inside the index of 2, which is 4. Since 3 is less than 4, this will be true. Then we initialize the value of index to the current value of j, which is 4. So now after that we increment j by 1, it will now become 5. Test if 5, since 5 is equals to 5, this will be false. Then we directly go in here. So we directly proceed to execute these lines of code. Then this line of code will pass the current element of index 2, which is 4, to this will pass the current value, or this will pass the current element of index 4, which is 3, to smaller number. So now smaller number have the value of 3. Then it will proceed to pass the value of the current then it will proceed to pass the current element inside the index of 2, which is 4 to the r to the index of to the r of index. Then so now our index of 4 will have the element of 4. Then we proceed to pass the current value of smaller number to to the index of 1, to the index of 2. So now our index of 2 have the element of 3. So now 3. Then we increment I by 1. So now our I is 3. Then test if 3 is less than 5, which is true. Then initialize the index variable to the current value of I, which is 3. So our index is 3. Then then proceed to the inner for loop. We initialize the j to the current value of I, which is 3, then added by 1, so it will now become 4. So test if 4 is less than the j. Then since it is true, then we proceed to test if the current element inside the index of 4, which is 4, is less than to the current value of is less than to the current element inside the index of 3, which is 5. This is since this is true, we directly, and then since this is true, we proceed to initialize the variable index to the current value of j, which is 4. Then increment j by 1. So now our j is 5. Test if 5. Then since 5 is not less than 5, this is false. And then we proceed to pass the element inside the index of 4, which is 4, to the smaller number. So now smaller number have the element of 4. Then we proceed to pass the element inside the index of 3 to the index of 4. So now index of 4 will have the element of 5. Then we proceed to pass the value, then we proceed to pass the element, then we proceed to pass the value of smaller number to index of 3. So now the index of 3 will now have the index of 4. So now the current element, and so now the elements inside the array is now 1, 2, 3, then 4, then 5, then 5. Then it will result to this output. The sorted element using selection sort is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we proceed to sorting elements using merge sort. To do a merge sort, we first divide the array into equal half, then combines them in a sorted manner. In the output of our code, we entered 5 unsorted elements in the array. We need to divide it to equal half. To do this, we created a merge sort method. In here, we created an int l and initialized it to the size of the array. Then since we only enter 5 elements, so in int l int l is equals to 5. Then we test if l is less than 2, This means it will test if there is only one element in the array, and if yes, it will directly return. Then we created int mid and initialize it to L divided by 2. Then since we only have 5 elements, our int mid is equals to 2. Then we created an array for left and for left. Then we created an array for our left and right side. We initialize the left array to mid. So left array will have the size of 2. Then we initialize the size of the right array to L minus mid. Since our L is 5, we subtract our mid, which is 2. So it means our array right will have the size of 3. Then we need to put elements in the left array. Then we initialize the size of array to mid. So our left array will have a size of 2. Then we initialize the size of the right array to L minus mid. Since our L is equals to 5, we subtract our mid, which is 2. It means our array right will have the size of 3. Then we need to put elements in left array. To do this, we use a for loop. In here, I is initialized to 0. This means we will start at the index 0, then we test if I is less than mid. It is true since our mid is 2, then we proceed to pass the value of R of I to left of I. So element 5 will be passed to array left index 0. We increment 1i by 1 each iteration until the condition I is less than mid is false. We continue the iteration for this for loop. So our array left will have the elements of 5 and 3. Because when I is incremented by 2, the condition I is less than mid is false, because I with a value of 2 will now be equals to mid, which is also the value of 2. Then we do the same process to put elements in the right array, but the difference is we initialize I to the value of 2. So it will start at index 2. Then as long as our I is less than L, which is 5, this for loop will be true. This for loop will continue the iteration. If condition is true, we will pass the value of R of I. I is 2, so it will pass the element in the index 2, so it means in the index 2 of the main array, which is 4. The current value of I is 2. If we subtract it by mid, which is also 2, it will become 0. So it means that our current value of R of I, which is 4, will be passed to right index 0 after putting the remaining elements to array right. So now we have left array that contains the left half of the original array and right array that contains the right half of the original array. Then we need to merge sort these two arrays. To do this, we need to recursively call it with our left and right array. Then we need to merge these two arrays together. To do this, we created another method. We call it merge method. This will take in the original array, so we can put the merge left and right array to it in sorted, then left and right array. Then inside this method, left size and initialize it to the length of the array, which is 2. Then and int right size and initialize it to the length of the array. Initialize it to the length of array and initialize it to the length of the right array, which is 3. We need to create 3 variables for iteration. Then we created 3 variables for iteration, which is I, j, and k, and initialize it to 0. I is for left and j is for right, then k is for merging the array. Then we created a while loop. Then the condition for this is if I is less than left size and j is less than right size. This means if any of this conditional statement is false, it will stop the loop. Inside this while loop, we compare left of I to right of j. If left of I is less than or equals to right of j, we pass the value of left of I to r of k, which is the main array. Then we incremented I by 1 to look at the next element in the left array. If left of I is greater than right of j, we pass the value of right of j to r of k. Then increment j by 1 to look at the next element in the right array. Then to set the next index in the main array, we increment then we increment k by 1. This will continue until the conditional statement of this while loop is false. Then we can add the remaining elements in either left or right array to the main array using these two while loop. These two while loop. Then we only need to call the merge method to our merge sort method, then give it then left and right. Then we call the merge method in our main method, then output the sorted elements. Then that is all for selection sort and merge sort algorithm. I hope you understand even just a little bit. And thank you. Bye bye.